Hey, what's up everybody, and welcome back to News Dose, and we got a few eye-popping Xbox topics to go over today. Apparently, Activision Blizzard was not their only major acquisition target because Phil Spencer, head of Xbox Phil Spencer, was actually emailing back and forth to see if they could pick up the likes of Sega and maybe even some other well-known studios not all that long ago either. Now, we also got some new details on their upcoming Perfect Dark reboot. This is one of my most anticipated games right now. I'm very excited about this one, but it has been radio silent since 2020. So what exactly is happening with this game? And well, now we got some answers, including its distant release window. Yes, as always though, do hit those buttons below if you're enjoying the content. Do subscribe, but other than that, let's just go and get right into it. Starting off with Sonic Superstars. In a way, it's rather interesting to kind of see Sonic make such a profound comeback here in the last couple of years. 2 consecutive years in a row, actually. I haven't seen as much excitement for Sonic in quite some time, but, last year we got a fantastic 3D release, Sonic Frontiers, and now here we are in 2023 with a brand new 2D entry, taking the series back to its roots, but with a bit of a makeover this time, Sonic Superstars. One side story to this release, though, is that it's coming out the same year as Super Mario Bros. Wonder, which ironically has a very similar art style. I mean, what's the chances of that happening the exact same year? Or actually, they might possibly release together on the same week. Yeah, so it's been spotted that both GameStop and Target temporarily listed Sonic Superstars as an October 17th release, just 3 days before the release of Mario Wonder. Now, there's nothing confirmed about this just yet, so I mean, keep that in mind, but the fact that 2 different retailers listed the exact same date, it is a little bit suspicious. That's all I'm trying to say here. Still, though, it's always best to wait for confirmation, though, so we'll kind of see how this plays out. But if true, I mean, I guess the old 90s rivalry will be live and kicking in 2023. Similar art styles and everything. Now, one common theme with this video today, though, is digital releases. We are quickly shifting into a more digital future, which is extremely evident as more data comes in showing the physical and digital split. And that seems to be the case with Sony's newest PlayStation 5 exclusive, Final Fantasy XVI. Over the weekend, it was revealed that Final Fantasy XVI, the UK, did launch as the #1 best-selling box game in the region, so congratulations there, well-deserved. But apparently, it wasn't a very strong boxed retail launch. In fact, Christopher Dring pointed out that its physical sales are 74% lower than Final Fantasy XV's launch back in 2016. Yeah, that doesn't exactly sound all that great, and I've seen a lot of people kind of freak out about this and use it as some type of proof that Final Fantasy XVI is struggling. But truthfully, that's not what these results say at all, or at least without the full picture. In reality, more than likely, this is just the latest example of how quickly we're moving into a more digital future. I myself, I am a little begrudging of this because I prefer physical games, but the fact is that, that's where we're heading. Look no further than what Xbox and PlayStation has done this generation. Both launched with an option to buy a digital-only console. So of course, digital's going to rise, and it's going to rise rapidly. There's a good portion of current owners out there that doesn't even have a disc drive, as they've bought into the more affordable digital-only consoles, the PlayStation 5 Digital or the Xbox Series S. So, whether we like it or not, that's where we are. And it'll definitely be interesting to see a more complete picture as more Final Fantasy XVI data comes in. But we are at a time where digital, more often than not, will outpace physical. Now, speaking of digital only, though, there was a lot of confusion that hit Starfield over the weekend. This was this whole weird thing, but what's happening here is that Bethesda's support apparently stated that all boxed editions of Starfield will not come with the disc, but rather a digital code instead. This exploded online. It was being plastered everywhere, and people were just going crazy over this. But hang on, there is more to this story. The first thing that I think everybody needs to kind of understand when it comes to this type of stuff is that support for almost every company can get things wrong. You can ask one support representative a question, and get one answer. And then you can ask another representative the exact same question and get a completely different answer. I'm sure a lot of you know exactly what I'm talking about here. So, I mean, it really just kind of depends on who you talk to. And at times, I mean, they just get things wrong. And there's a very good chance, or actually it's confirmed, that's exactly what's happening here. Somebody that was running the support account at the time, they just got it wrong. And that's why the original tweet has since been deleted. And more importantly, Bethesda themselves has since stated that there, in fact, will be a disc included in the standard edition for Xbox. Now, the Constellation Collector's Edition, that instead, that will come with the digital-only code, though we've really known about that since day one, and the reason for that is the same reason that we've seen countless other collector's editions this generation come with a digital-only code. PlayStation, as an example, they do the exact same thing with games like God of War Ragnarok, and the reason that this happens is because of those digital-only consoles that we were just talking about a moment ago. Having two separate consoles, that does make it more difficult to make collector's editions. Now, I've seen some people kind of argue that they should still include a disc on top of those digital codes for us that do prefer physical. I mean, I would love that, but I think companies kind of fear that because then suddenly a lot of people would just simply sell their disc immediately. A lot of people would need a disc, so the market could ultimately get flooded with a cheaper option as people would sell off their discs at a reduced price. So it's kind of a messy situation. Plus, studios, they want digital only as they're going to make more money by not having to make those discs. I mean, I myself, though, I don't like that we don't get a disc in collector's editions anymore. It puts me off almost entirely. But again, this is, I mean, it's kind of where we are in gaming. We're quickly moving into that more digital future. Now, of course, over the last year and a half, as many of you all are aware, Activision Blizzard has dominated the Xbox acquisition discussions. But ironically, this whole court case that they find themselves in right now has now brought their other prior acquisition targets to the surface before they pulled the trigger on Activision. Now, I think that we all knew already that they were looking at different companies. This isn't some kind of revelation or anything like that. But thanks to some emails from Phil Spencer, we now know the scope of what they were looking at, and okay, they had apparently some pretty massive targets in mind, which apparently includes Thunderful, Supergiant Games, Niantic, Playrix, Zynga, Bungie, IO Interactive, that's an interesting one, and then also Scopely. I mean, there's definitely some big names here, which is really a mix of everything. You have some highly talented smaller studios like Thunderful and Supergiant Games. You got some AAA studios like IO Interactive and Bungie. And then also some big mobile studios. I think, though, that's kind of why Activision, it fits Microsoft's plans perfectly because it's basically all three in one single buyout. Hypothetically, though, if Activision didn't fall in their lap, however, Microsoft apparently might have actually picked up another major publisher because, interestingly enough, Phil Spencer back in 2020 emailed Satya Nadella and Amy Hood about whether or not he could approach Sega. Yes, Sega about an acquisition. We can actually see here where it reads, I'm writing to request strategy approval to approach Sega Sammy regarding a potential acquisition of their Sega gaming studios. For context, Bill and I have reviewed the business case for acquiring Sega and are both supportive. We believe that Sega has built a well-balanced portfolio of games across segments with global geographic appeal and will help us accelerate Xbox Game Pass both on and off console. Please find the attached memo and bullets below for additional detail on our strategy to prioritize our next acquisition target, a brief overview of Sega's gaming portfolio, and the value drivers for the potential acquisition. He then kind of lists his reason for prioritizing specific targets and goes on to say, keeping in mind these leading priorities, we evaluate a set of targets, both individually and in combination of our own studios to determine the best strategic fit. Sega is the most attractive next acquisition target due to its global PC catalog, presence on mobile in Asia, and global brand affinity on console through its classic IP. These are very similar things to Activision, but maybe on a lesser scale. Now, however, we don't know of what kind of answer Phil Spencer got. I mean, here we've seen his email, but we didn't exactly see a follow-up. For all we know, he could have been declined. They might have not had a lot of faith in Sega's long-term, but what makes this email even more interesting is that in 2021, again, Sega was spotted on their acquisition list as a key target. So, I mean, my guess is that he had some type of approval to look into it further at the bare minimum. Otherwise, why would they still have it on their list a year later? Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that Sega was willing to sell. I mean, we have to keep that in mind. It does take two to tango, of course. But something that we have seen since 2020 is a growing relationship between Microsoft and Sega. Sega is one of Xbox's biggest Japanese supporters, and time again, they've put their games into Xbox Game Pass, whether that be with Yakuza, Soul Hackers 2, or even Persona. One of the other things that kind of stands out about their target acquisitions, though, was the mobile studios like Niantic and Zynga. Now, Phil Spencer touched up on the Zynga acquisition last week at court at the FTC. Of course, we all know that Take-Two, they bought them instead. But the reason this kind of stands out is that it makes one thing very crystal clear. Microsoft has not been lying. Mobile gaming is a big part of their future plans, and that's what they keep saying. They keep saying that's one of the reasons that they want to acquire Activision because of King. And I think a lot of people have kind of dismissed that as an excuse to maybe bypass regulators. But the proof is here. Microsoft absolutely has been looking to make a big splash mobile acquisition. And again, I think that this is why Activision Blizzard is perfect for Microsoft. They get those big IP like Call of Duty, Diablo, Spyro, and Crash that will really help accelerate Xbox Game Pass. This is something that they mentioned with Sega as well. That's one of the big parts of this acquisition. And then they'll also get that big splash mobile acquisition they've been looking for. They want to enter that mobile market, and Activision Blizzard, it really does both of those things. It gives them the IP to really push Xbox Game Pass, and it also gives them the expertise to enter that mobile market. Still, though, you have to kind of wonder if the Sega acquisition, if they would have went with that instead, would that have been far less of a headache getting it through regulations? I mean, we've seen this with Activision Blizzard for a year and a half now. Sega might have been a little bit easier, all while still having some pretty recognizable IP like Sonic and Persona. Maybe not as big, but still would have been pretty impactful. Also, a pretty good way of getting into Japan where they're not particularly strong. I want to hear what you all think about all this, though. Sega or Activision? Who would have you preferred Xbox get? Or do you just fear both? Now, we also got some pretty big news for another Xbox exclusive. I mean, they had a pretty big weekend, and that includes Perfect Dark. IGN's Rebecca Valentine wrote a big article about what's happening with this game and why we haven't heard about it since 2020. I mean, this game has gone radio silent. Outside of the small CGI trailer, we've seen nothing. And there's been a lot of concern online about this specific game. We've seen developers leave the initiative at an alarming rate, and then in 2021, Crystal Dynamics, they were brought on as a co-developer. Now, this is something that's never really concerned me personally. I think the whole co-developer concern has always been overblown online. I think Crystal Dynamics is highly talented, and they've already proven they can reboot a popular IP like Tomb Raider. So I trust that they will majorly help with Perfect Dark, which is more apparent than ever after this article. Thanks to a new deep dive, we do now know unequivocally the initiative has had some internal struggles. Now, I'll drop a link in the description below. It's a great read. I highly recommend checking it out yourself. But ultimately, the initiative has had some troubles for a few different reasons, one of which was their previous co-developer, Certain Affinity. Apparently, the two were not a great fit together. It seems like the initiative wanted more creative output from their co-developer, and Certain Affinity wasn't really giving them that. They're more of a support studio that creates clearly defined games, and that's not what they were going for with Perfect Dark. So they just didn't work out at all together, and eventually they parted ways after the two made little progress. Even worse here, though, was that the initiative, they kept backtracking on their own ideas. Seems like they would make something, it might look good, and then they would just restart it. In their case, it sounds like there might be too much creative output, if that's possible, from too many different directions that led to frustration. People then left the studio, and ultimately, not much progress was made, or at least until now. So here's actually the good news. Okay, so I understand people will read this article, and they might think it's all bad. I get it. But there is actually a silver lining here, because now with Crystal Dynamics on board, reportedly, they're back on track making good progress once again. According to one former Crystal Dynamics employee, they had to rework a lot of stuff as it was kind of a mess before they got there, but thankfully, with them on board, things seem to be going smooth again, and things are now shaping up. However, according to some different sources, and this is the big news here, it is still early in development. Reportedly, it's looking like it'll be another 2 to 3 years before release. There is talks on whether or not it might be episodic or not. Sounds like they haven't really decided on that. But, that is kind of the bad news. It's going to be a while before you play Perfect Dark. But hey, at least things are looking good now. And for me, I'm okay with that personally. I've been waiting for a new Perfect Dark game for such a long time. I really just want this game to be good. So, hey, take your time. Speaking of acquisitions a moment ago, though, Microsoft might want to consider Crystal Dynamics from the Embracer Group. See if they can maybe pull them away. Let's go take a look at the poll of the day, though. We're asked you all, if Metal Gear Solid 4 comes to the Metal Gear Solid collection, will you get it? And we actually got a resounding yes here, with 54% of you all voting yes, while 27% said no, and then 9% of you said that you're already planning to get it. So, I mean, if that leak is true, and that Metal Gear Solid 4 might be actually coming, this could be absolutely game-changing for this collection. And, I mean, it makes sense. While I think the Metal Gear Solid collection looks great as is, a lot of these games have been ported to various consoles over the years. Even Metal Gear Solid 3, that was available on the 3DS. Metal Gear Solid 4, however, though, that's the one that really needs a port. This is a game that's been trapped on the PS3 for more than a decade. And it's such a great game. I keep saying it, but it is my own personal favorite in the series. And I really hope it comes back. Not just so I can play it once again, but also just so more people can see how good this game really is. So let's just go and cross our fingers and hope that this leak is actually true. Anyways, though, that's it for this episode. But if you like the video, don't forget to bell notification and subscribe button for more content just like this. Also, if you'd like to support the channel through Patreon, thank you for making this content possible. Peace out.